And while the next panel take the stage, let me just point out some highlights from what I perceive from that panel. Teodora pinpointed Slovenia as a destination that is really promoting sustainability, particularly in the skiing sector. And she pointed out as well that the tourist mindset is changing. It's embracing sustainability. Inga talked about Oslo and Manchester, zero carbon pilots, using industry, not specifically Radisson policies, in order to implement that. And the clients love it, apparently, and data is measuring that. And there are 10 more, I believe, to come. We heard Jean-Baptiste, when he was tourism minister, launching initiatives which involve local communities. And he said also the importance of investing more and more. Please take the stage behind. Investing more and more to match the likes of Saudi when it comes to tourism. Teodora talked about local communities again being really important, having a voice now in decision making. And she also mentioned that we now have a European Commissioner for Sustainable Tourism and Transport. Note this is sustainable in that. Alistair talked about tourism figures growing in spite of what's happening with the US and how in different parts of the world people are reacting to climate change, coolcationing being a very good example. And perhaps most importantly, as Teodora said, the next generation demands sustainability, and we have a duty to provide the foundation for that. They will never forgive us if we don't do that. Really, really important. Okay, so this next panel is one I've been really looking forward to. Last year, one of the panelists here, I thought, stole the show with her perspective and an incisive analysis about the perspective from outer space of what's happening on this planet. And how climate change is going to affect tourism. What I love about panels like this is that we get the viewpoints of people outside the industry, unusual suspects, as the title says. So I'm going to now ask Paige McClanahan to introduce those unusual suspects, and let's see what happens. Paige.
Thank you very much, Rajan. Thank you, everyone. I realize this is the last session before lunch, but I promise it's going to be a good one. So over the next half hour or so, we're going to be peering under the ocean, sticking our heads into outer space, looking into biology labs, and gathering insights from the worlds of infrastructure and transport mapping. We've heard a lot this morning about how travel is in an age of turbulence. Interstate conflict, cyber threats, tariff wars, climate change, of course, are reshaping the industry. These same forces of turbulence are also stimulating innovation. And by listening to voices from outside our usual circles, we can discover new tools, new collaborations, and new ways to address the challenges facing us at this particular moment in travel. So our panelists today bring exactly that kind of out-of-the-box perspective. Let me introduce them briefly. So we have Laurence Monnoyer-Smith, who is Director for Sustainable Development at the Centre National d'Études Spatiales, the French National Space Agency. She works at the intersection of space technology, climate science, and sustainability. We have Myriam Younes, who is Managing Director of Strategic Partnerships and Advertising at Rome to Rio, a global travel platform mapping every way to get from A to B, planes, trains, buses, ferries, and local transport. She brings the human mobility and data perspective to this conversation, how understanding where and how people travel can help destinations manage tourism flows sustainably. We have Will Bateman, founder and CEO of CCell, a UK company pioneering nature-inspired coastal protection. Drawing on advanced modeling of shorelines and sand movement, he and his team design and install biomimetic artificial reefs that work with marine life to regenerate reefs and defend coastlines from erosion. And finally, we have Roberto Martinoli, who sits on the board of RINA in Italy, where he draws on decades of maritime expertise to help drive innovation and sustainability, including through floating infrastructure for tourism, which I'm very excited to learn more about. So with that, let's dive into the conversation. I'd love to start the discussion with you, Laurence. As Rajan said, you made quite an impression last year. And we've heard a lot about sustainability this morning in terms of the need to reduce our climate, our climate emissions, our greenhouse gases. what are the latest climate data actually telling us? You know, what is actually happening with climate change? Why do we need to make these changes?
Right. Thank you very much for this invitation. So your question is very much about facts. So later on, I might develop a little bit, but I'm going to try to be really precise about what's happening, and especially in touristic areas. And as you know, we are about to start the Conference of Parties, the climate conference in Brazil in a couple of weeks. I think it's appropriate time to talk about what the International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is saying recently. Of course, these news are not extremely good ones. I'm sure you know about that, but it's not as bad as it could have been in the worst scenarios. Let's put it that way. What we are witnessing now, what the science tells us, is that we already have experienced an average temperature increase of about 1.2 degrees, and this is an average, of course. As this projection are average counting with the impact of the ocean, which cools down the planet. If we take Europe, for example, Europe has already experienced an increase of almost 2 degrees since the pre-industrial eras, and the forecast is that for example, in Europe, that we will witness an increase of 4 degrees by the end of the century, and even probably before that. So there are various differences, whether you're in the continent, where you're close to the sea. But what we can really see now is that we have an increase in extreme events, heat waves, megafires, and floods, an accelerated melting of ice. What's interesting what I would like to spot now during this event, because a lot of tourist places are located by the sea. So let's talk about rising sea levels and coastal erosion. The melting of the ice sheets and mountain glaciers, along with the expansion of the ocean, are now causing an increase in the average sea level. And this is already, you can see it right now, okay? And the average figures, so the elevation, the rising of the sea is now for about more than 4 millimeters a year. And it has increased since the beginning of the 1990s. So what we see, we have observation by altimetric satellites, which dates back to the 1980s, with cooperation between NASA and CNES. Those are the first. So we have, robust data which go back to the 80s. So at this rate, we know, and these are facts, these are projections which are not disputable. The Maldives, 80% of the territory will be submerged by 2050, and it will disappear, will be submerged by the end of the century. The Seychelles, 20% of the beaches have disappeared since 1990, that we can observe, and by the middle of the century, it will be more than 40%. The Key West in the US, 20% of them has already disappeared, and we're probably looking forward 40%. Dubai, flood and soil salinization threaten Palm Jumeirah and the World Islands. Bangkok, 40% of the city is below sea level by 2050, making more than 15 to 20% of the city inhabitable. New Orleans, 50% of the city is below sea level, and you know that not only this rising sea level, but also hurricanes, threatening a lot of parts of this of the neighborhoods, and we already have witnessed that, unfortunately. So by the sea, all these figures that shows that resilience should be now the main concern for these places. Something you might not have really heard of is the combination of heat and humidity in many countries, and that will make certainly certain places inhabitable starting by the middle of this century, and it will worsen depending on the effort we're putting into the reduction of greenhouse gas emission by the end of the century. Why? Because when you have a combination of heat above 40 degrees and humidity above 90 degrees, meaning the body cannot, this provokes strong dehydration and respiratory problems, and it causes some region not being habitable. Oh, hello. I'm talking about Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bangladesh, Uttar Pradesh in India, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Florida, Louisiana. By the end of the century, we have to make studies, vulnerability studies, based on robust data in order to forecast what's going to happen. That's what we do in the launch pad. We have the European launch pad, spaceport we have in French Guiana, which is, of course, an important concern for us. Just to tell you that it's not only in touristic area, but it's also concerning, companies and like us. And we are conducting vulnerability studies based on scientific data, showing that probably by the end of this century, and we're trying to focus by 2070. We might face several months a year where you cannot work durably outside. A bit like in the Antarctic right now. Well, it's -50 and you cannot work easily outside. Will be the same in many areas in the world. So I'm really sorry. I'm not really being really kind with you now. I know about that, but I think we still have time not only to change our habit, to change our model, our business model, so that in the future we make sure that we are not worsening the situation and working, and secondly, in order to adapt and to be resilient. I just want to conclude this awful introduction I'm giving you with a couple of insight of what's the impact. It's not only going to impact tourism, it's also important to have in mind what's going to be the impact on the population living in touristic areas. Because it's not only threatening tourist destination, but the livelihood of local communities, and we have to have that in mind. It's going to change the ecosystem, it's going to change the landscape that attract the visitors. The lack of water from melting glaciers can lead to water shortage, affecting hotels, resorts, and other touristic infrastructure that requires water to operate. And there's going to be conflicts of uses, of course, between the industry and between tourists. So we have to think about that when we think in the future of how we interact with local community. I'm really sorry. I'm being
well. No, I'd say
not
thank
being
you.
really joyous, but climate change. It's gonna. So what we have to plan. What the next step of that is not only make sure that the industry is trying to contribute to the international effort, and every industry will have to make effort. Not only tourism, but everyone. And we as a space industry also have to contribute. So we are all on the same spaceship basically, and we only have one. And this is not a secret. There is no planet B. Just to make sure that we're all on the same length, okay? We cannot live in Mars, okay? It's not possible, right? Especially not for us in this very room. There will be, we have to adapt, and there is another way of having really nice experience, much fun, visiting countries in a different planet.
Well, thank you, Laurence, for that bit of a wake-up call. But it's wonderful to hear that you're monitoring that data. But yeah, gosh, some really iconic tourist destinations there, Seychelles, Maldives, Abu Dhabi, all being seriously affected. But we're going to talk a little bit later on about the data that you're working with and how other people, people working in travel can access that data and work with it and use it to, improve the resilience of their own destination. Because, as you say, we need resilience now. So thank you, Laurence, for that sobering presentation of facts. Myriam, I'd like to turn to you because we've just gotten a global perspective from Laurence. You also have a global perspective looking at traveler movements. I mean, you're following sort of billions of traveler movements around the world. What trends are you seeing? What shifts are you seeing? And are you seeing any links with climate change there?
Thank you, Paige, and thank you, Laurence. What an impactful opening. It's hard to go after that. I'll bring a view that's a little closer to the ground and is based on the 600 million visits that we get on our platform every year. Maybe a little bit of background for everybody and context if you don't know us. I've chatted with a few of you already that know Room to Rio and love the website and the app, but for those of you who don't know us, we're a trip planning a trip planning tool, and we map every transport mode to get from a point A to any point B. From the classic ones, usual suspects. We're the unusual suspects here today, so you've got the usual suspects from plane to rail, but we also have buses, shuttles, public transport, all the way to water buffalo in Japan. It's a real thing, by the way. We have schedules, speed, cost, and everything. Water buffalo or a transport mode, hot air balloons, tuk-tuk, and everything in between. So we help travelers get from any A to any B from the moment, because a trip doesn't start when you get on the plane. It starts when you leave your house, and it ends when you take off your shoes once you've arrived at your destination. So we help travelers make conscious choices everywhere along the way, because there are so many opportunities during that journey to make the right choice. And we know, because we're seeing it, there is a shift that is already starting to happen. For example, we're seeing that any travel that is under 150 kilometers, 96% of those are ground transport. So we know that people are consciously choosing not to fly and to use ground transport instead. But it goes even further than that. We saw in our trends in Europe in the last year that searches for ground travel were 100 times more than searches for flights. We're seeing an increase in ground, in buses, in every alternative transport mode, which I think is showing us that there is a willingness. There was a report from Booking.com recently that was saying that 84% of travelers care about sustainability. Of course they do. After what we just heard, I don't think we have any other option. So that I'm not surprised. But where it gets interesting is that there's another report from Expedia this time that says that 47% of travelers would be okay to choose a longer route in order to be sustainable. And I think this is where we're seeing a shift in behavior. So they're okay for it to be less convenient in order to protect the planet. So this is where really we're trying to support those travelers, because the intention is there, but I think we need to help them. We need to show them. We need to show them cost, speed, convenience, accessibility is also a very important one that we've been talking about. And then once we give them all of those options, then we can trust that the travelers will start making the right call.
Thank you, Myriam, and it's wonderful to have a bit of optimism there with after. But 47% of travelers willing to travel longer if it means a more sustainable trip. So that's an encouraging statistic there. I'm going to turn to Will Bateman now, and turning a bit more back to the climate data that Laurence was mentioning, talking about the impact on coastlines, which is exactly where you work, Will. So tell us about what you're seeing in the work you're doing under the oceans and along the coastlines, and how you're using data to inform the work you're doing.
Okay, thank you, Paige. I thought I'd start actually with Playa del Carmen, which for the Brits amongst us who don't speak any other language than English, playa means beach. So if you go to Playa del Carmen, which is on the eastern side of Mexico, if you go to Playa del Carmen on the eastern side of Mexico, 10 years ago, they had these phenomenal beaches. They were about 50 meters wide, and hence the name for that town. Go there now, and in places you will struggle to literally walk between the sea and the hotels. And you can see that in all the data. So the data that Laurence's company, so from Copernicus and also from NOAA, shows you this. You can see these changes. You can actually start to forward predict what's going to happen. And that's really where we sort of step in. So we use a huge amount of open source data. We collect it. I mean, I'm talking about sort of terabytes of data that we collect together. And we build large statistical models that try to predict not only what's happened, so why have places like Playa del Carmen seen this sort of erosion, but what's actually going to happen in the future. And coastlines are an extremely sort of complicated system. They are very interconnected. So if you see sand increasing in one area, it's invariably because you are stealing it from somebody else. So you can't just go and build your groin or your breakwater without thinking about the potential adverse effects this might have to other people in the region. And just to give a sort of, because we're talking about data, just to give a sense of the sort of data that Laurence provides. So they have gone out and they've collected data from wave buoys and wind turbines, etc. So wind measurement sensors. And they put it into something called a hindcast model. So we're all familiar with forecasting, so we look into the future and the BBC will tell us what the weather's going to do tomorrow or week in the future. What these clever guys do is they would take the wave buoy data and say, given what has happened, what must have happened elsewhere in the region in order for those wave conditions to have occurred at those wave buoys. So in other words, they run those forecasting models backwards. And that's really cool for us, because what that does is it gives us data points all around the globe. So when we go and look at a site, look at a hotel, we will go to the nearest data point, and they will give us sort of 20, 30 years worth of data that we can then learn from. So obviously we're looking for sort of general trends within that 20 to 30 years. But the statistics then comes to play. So we've been doing a lot of work with organizations like Imperial College, Cornell in the US, etc., to build very detailed models to predict what's not going to happen, not just what's happened in that 20 to 30 years, but what might happen in the next 100 or even 1,000 years. So our reefs, for example, we build to 110 years. So in other words, the largest event that occurs in 110 years, we need to be able to withstand. We're not expecting to see any sort of significant damage. We're expecting our reefs to be survivable up to 1,000 years. So they will get damaged, but they're not going to wash up on the shore or cause any sort of damage to any humans, right? So it's quite important that we understand those numbers. And we take the data from, so having built a statistical model, we then take from Laurence, and we also then go off and get other bathymetry data to build a local model of what's going on around the hotel. So she's giving us data at about sort of every 100-kilometer sort of resolution. We can then take that data, we'll go to, say, a hotel, we'll often do a local bathymetry sort of measurements, and then we can then build up a much more precise simulation of what's happening locally. Hopefully I haven't gone into too much detail. And ultimately, we then have the finish, we have a very fun game at the end where we essentially sit there and say, okay, if we build a reef, what is going to be the impact? And we're there really trying to optimize a number of criteria, the cost that the hotel wants to pay, the visibility of the reef, how quickly we want it to have an impact. But ultimately, we want to, hold back the erosion to the shores. And to give a sense of that, on the northern coast of the Yucatan, where we have a big project, we ended up installing a reef that was only 10 meters long, but it restored sand on over 250 meters of shoreline. So if you get it right, you can have a very dramatic impact with quite a small system. And that all comes back from the modeling, and thanks to Laurence and her data.
So another bit of optimism there, using Laurence's data to actually build reefs off the coastline to protect hotels. Do we have some photos that we could show there? And I'm sorry, Myriam, your slide as well. But here we go. Is this your? Would you like to tell us what we're looking at here, Will?
So the top image is what are called wave-induced currents. So when waves move towards the shore, they're actually pushing water onto the shore. So the crest of the wave moves water towards the shore. The trough of a wave is moving it away, but it's very slightly asymmetric. So you see actually this gradual build-up of water towards the shore. And if you left without any other sort of balance, the entire ocean would end up on our shoreline, which clearly can't happen. So what you see is you have, higher sea levels or higher water levels near the shore, and that water then runs back. So surfers amongst you will be familiar with rip currents. Along here, you see this sort of longshore drift. And whilst waves are very important in coming in and breaking up the shoreline, particularly when we have hurricanes, so they create all that sediment, is actually these currents that move the sand around, and actually the things that you really want to focus on. So you've got to understand, effectively, and this is just, by the way, one wave condition and one time step. So this is only 3 hours worth of sea conditions that we're looking at. We would then build a model up over hundreds of years from a collection of those. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Fascinating. Roberto, I'd like to bring you into the conversation. We're staying in the sort of theme of oceans. Can you tell us about innovations that you're working on, also along coastlines, specifically floating resorts, if I understood that correctly? Tell us about what these are, how do they work, and tell us the whole story.
Well, I think that floating resorts are becoming quite interesting at the moment, because there are a lot of initiatives around the world in areas that are completely lacking any type of infrastructure. And when you go and need to build something in those areas, it's really very, very challenging. And what has been thought and realized already on a few occasions is that floating infrastructures that can be moved strategically to the areas that need to be developed are definitely a very interesting solution. And they are a good solution not only because the challenge of building in those areas is really, really very, very important. And by not having any local source of personnel and energy or whatever, you also run the risk of creating problems to the local environment, because for obvious reason. And by building it remotely and transporting it to the location and installing it, of course, in a very proper way, so considering the environment, having made all the obvious studies and consideration about the local condition, it is definitely a possible and very viable solution that in some cases is also more economical, besides being also probably more friendly with the local environment. So, and you can go from building villas or building resorts or building whatever type of infrastructure. Actually, it does not have to be necessarily something that has to do with tourism or hospitality. It can be any other type of infrastructure that need to exist. And those infrastructure can also be built in an autonomous way, which means that if you don't have any source of energy locally or any other connection, they can be equipped properly, and you can have any type of solution. You can produce energy in any way we could produce energy today, going from the traditional, power station to gas that are definitely a lot more friendly, to hydrogen, to nuclear, because there are indeed many initiatives around the world with very small nuclear stations, and which have the big advantage of being built and constructed and fed with the fuel in a proper location where things can be done properly, transported to the site, and can be autonomous for a period out to 5 years. So a lot of those things are happening slowly but surely, and I think that in the future we will see a lot more of that. So, and the reason why I thought to bring this example to this panel was because it kind of gives a solution for those critical areas that you might want to develop, and you can do it in a way that is definitely probably more controlled and more safe in terms of not creating any bad effect on the destination.
So is this perhaps the future of tourism in the Maldives or the Seychelles?
Well, Maldives, I think, is a good example, because And I forgot to mention one very important thing, that floating infrastructure can move. And I've been working in the cruise industry all of my life, and one of the advantages of having floating hotels is that they can move, and they can move to the destination that are of the utmost interest in that particular moment. So if you build an infrastructure in that way, you can also move it to another location for any reason, you know, that could arise in the future. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I imagine you need a lot of data as you're thinking of these floating infrastructures and how you build them, where you build them, how you install them. I'd like to put a question to the group, maybe specifically to Laurence and Myriam, well, any of you. But we're thinking about these big data sets, and I imagine there might be people in the audience here who would like to use these data sets. What are the best ways to access them, or how do you see your partners using them? I mean, Will gave us one great example, but how do we make sure that these data are actually used and employed and not just sort of sitting in reports or in a database that no one accesses?
Yeah, you're right. It's not that easy because these data are quite difficult to exploit, and as Will just said, you need a high level of expertise in order to make it usable for the tourist industry. So there are open source data which are already presented in a usable way, but maybe at a macro level, maybe not at the resort level. For this, you definitely need to go through companies such as Will's one, and or there are other type of services that are provided by startups and companies that are dealing with space data and providing specific cases for local resorts. Otherwise, you have the Copernicus data that we'll mention. You have the Climate Change Service, which is open source, available online. Actually, Europe is providing worldwide data freely for everyone. Just want to mention that. Because those are extremely deep services that they provide, not only emergency services, meteo services, ocean, and climate change service. So if you go on the climate change service website, you will find, you know, massive information that can be useful. But if you want to go further, you have interrogation about certain type of resorts or certain countries. You definitely need to go through companies such as Will's. That will help you have a better insight of what's going to happen in the next 20 years. Just to make just to share with you, what's going to happen in the next 20 years is already written. So it's not a gamble, okay? We know what's going to happen in the next 20 years. So that's actually quite interesting for investors, I think, and I think that's something you really need to have a look at. What's going to happen in 40 years might be a bit, you know, there's a bit more uncertainty. But otherwise, I mean, for the investment for the next 20 years, definitely that is something companies should look for.
Certainly, certainly. And Myriam, your data sets, how can people work with these?
We are more than happy to share our data. It is fascinating to see how people plan their travel door to door and the way that they make choices along the way. I think it's also extremely valuable for destination planning and tourism management as we think about the flows, as we think about you know, this regulation, this seasonal spread and regional spread, but particularly in 3 areas. I think infrastructure design, because again, the trip doesn't stop when the person gets off the plane. From there, they still need to navigate within the destination, and we know that a very big focus for tourism boards is to make sure that their travelers have a good experience when in market. So for that, you need to understand what's important to them and how they navigate that. I think another thing is the seasonality. There's no such thing as an off-season anymore. We want to encourage travelers to travel all year long because we know that this will support what we're trying to achieve here. So we need to show them that, you know, operators operate all year long, and again, give them these options. And then I think as well, and we talked a little bit about it today, is measuring this community impact and seeing how, we talk a lot about it, about how tourism affects community and local people. And I think, understanding, seeing that data on the ground, again, once in the destination really helps, I think, destinations and all players manage the strategy accordingly. So again, more than happy to talk, that's why I'm here, to talk to everyone here, everybody who cares about building a better tourism for tomorrow. So our data is here for that.
Thank you, Myriam. And I'd love to, go ahead, Will, yes, please.
Very briefly, I mean, we have to mention AI. I mean, data has never been more accessible than it is now, So Laurence and others have been collecting this stuff for 30, 40 years, but I can guarantee if you went to ChatGPT and say, give me the wave conditions in this location, it will probably give you some piece of code that, in 10 seconds of how to get it. So things have really changed in the last couple of years.
Yeah, just one little comment, because I've been exploiting new destination in my past experiences. I mean, I think that it is not that we are lacking data. I mean, it's that there are too many of those data, and the most difficult thing is to be able to read it and read it in the right way. And I think one other comment I would like to make is that we should also convince the regulators to be a little more active in that sense, because who better than them could at least establish certain principles? Because, there is a development plan in a certain area, and they should be also the one to contribute to look into what is going to happen in the next 20 to 30 years. Does it make any sense to authorize the building of an hotel on that beach that is going to disappear? Or if you want to build an hotel, you need to do certain things. So it's a very difficult work, and it's so complex, and there are so many layers that are one on top of the other that, to find someone that has the 360-degree view is extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult because, people are investing money when they are doing these initiatives, so they don't want to do it to waste the money. So, but it's difficult to find the right support, and it's very challenging.
Okay, well, as a follow-on from that, and as a final question to the group, as I know we're running short on time here, if there's one piece of advice that you could offer to people in the audience today in terms of how they can use data or science to future-proof their destination, their operations, their company, what would you say? Maybe we can start with Roberto and move back to Laurence.
Well, I have already expressed the challenges that we have had in finding that solution.
So give us the advice.
I think that first of all, cooperation. To be those things should be shared, shouldn't be kept for someone alone. And this is one thing, because again, the difficulty, the exercise is extremely difficult, and I think the trade organization should be also the tools to use to put all of those big brains together and make sure that the choices are made in the right way.
Thank you. Will?
My final remark is don't see the technology around data and modeling as a cost. You've got to see it as an investment in the future. It's that same old adage, failure to plan is planning to fail, right? So you don't necessarily need to use us. A lot of this is open source, but get out there, use this information, try to predict what's going to happen in the lifespan of what you think is your hotel is going to exist for. And I'm not just thinking about bricks and mortar, I'm also thinking about the environment around which you are attracting people. In my mind, and certainly for me, we go to see nature. A hotel that overlooks Hyde Park has a much higher room rate than one that looks over an industrial site. A hotel that has a big beach has a much higher occupancy rate and can charge more for its rooms, and similarly for the marine life. So we've got to start thinking not just about the bricks and mortar, but what is our impact on the marine life around us, and push that forward.
Thank you.
And we're not expensive.
Myriam, yeah.
If there was one thing I would say, the journey doesn't end when the traveler gets to the destination. I would say, and use science and technology to influence them, not just attract them, but also influence their choices from the moment that they start planning, would be my advice. And I think we have a great opportunity to do that. And eventually we will do that for the good of what I call the 3P, which is the people, the places, and the planet.
Laurence.
Yeah, I just love what Myriam just said. I think the journey is part of the travel, and that is something I wish that everybody's would work on, meaning make the journey really part of discovering yourself, discovering things, new things, instead of just, you know, take a plane, travel for 15 years, and then arrive somewhere which has been already exploited a lot and harmful with community and harm the community. So there are many, many ways of traveling. People have been traveling for you know, thousands of years, and I think build the experiment, and this is something you can do with AI as well, and with the use of data, saying, well, what type of experience are you seeking? And maybe that is something, thanks to all this data and you have on your platform, proposing new things, new experience. That would be great.
Well, thank you very much to the panel for this mix of realism, a bit of optimism, and some practical strategies and advice for everyone. Please join me in thanking the panel for this. Thank you.